Well, this morning, let me be the first person to tell you that today is not Christmas Eve. I'm not gaslighting you, by the way. I'm speaking liturgically. And liturgically speaking, it's not Christmas Eve. That starts in a few hours from now. But right now, it's still Advent. Now, pastorally speaking, we knew there was a strong likelihood that the busyness of life might make it challenging for people to attend too many services. So for this fourth Sunday, we're only having this one service. But it is still Advent. And don't worry, we can celebrate Christmas Eve later, and we will. But take a moment to be patient and to dwell in the waning hours of Advent. Don't rush to Christmas too quickly, because we're just not there yet. Now, come Christmas Eve, in a few hours, there's sure to be a whole lot more visitors and guests here. So during Christmas Eve services, it's important to preach a lighthearted sermon that teaches us how to relate the Christmas story to our lives in the 21st century. But that'll be on Christmas Eve. For now, it's not Christmas Eve. It's Advent. The fourth Sunday of Advent, to be exact. And Advent is a time to be a little uncomfortable. Now, this is still going to be a message about how God loves you. But the avenues we're going to explore might jolt us a little bit. And if that's the case, and you happen to feel jolted, then I'm going to ask you to bear with me and just let yourself be okay with whatever this fourth Sunday of Advent leads you to feel. I know it's a tough ask, but it's the shortest fourth week of Advent possible. So I think we'll survive. We're cramming a whole week's worth of prayer and reflection into a matter of hours, after all. Now, the office staff was joking with me earlier this week about the juxtaposition of featuring the Annunciation story, the gospel story we just shared, with the rapid approach of Christmas Eve, which we will celebrate in a few hours from now. And for those of us who attend both the Advent 4 and the Christmas Eve liturgies, and by the way, I hope that's a whole lot of people, but we hear the story of Mary learning that she's going to be a mother, and then hours later she delivers her baby. What a quick and painless pregnancy that must be. How many women would love to sign up for that kind of a deal? Now, this is a familiar and an important gospel story. We hear the gospel story about the Annunciation several times throughout the year, and even a few times kind of rapid fire during the month of December. The Feast of the Annunciation takes place on March 25th, a slightly more accurate 9 months prior to the celebration of the birthday of Jesus. And this is, of course, the gospel passage we hear on that day, the Feast of the Annunciation. It's also the gospel passage we share if we happen to observe the feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe on December 12th. And we hear it a few days earlier if we happen to observe a feast called the Immaculate Conception. Now, neither of these feasts are on the official calendar of the Episcopal Church. But plenty of Anglicans and Episcopalians do observe those feast days. And to many Christians worldwide, they are important feasts. Have you ever heard of the Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Manhattan? It's an Episcopal church in Times Square. And a lot of people call it Smoky Mary's because of all the incense that is burned at every single service that is celebrated there. Now, one time I stayed in New York City, and I knew nothing about St. Mary's other than it was the closest church to my hotel. And so I wandered in, dressed in my shorts and my sandals and my Aloha shirt like I usually do, and you should have seen the looks that people gave me, because I've never been so uncomfortable in a church in my life. Everyone else was in their Sunday best, and my Sunday best was, well, not. I couldn't Couldn't wait to get out of there. But nonetheless, it is a very nice church and has a very beautiful liturgy. I just wasn't dressed right for it. And St. Mary's, as you can imagine, has a very strong devotion to their patron saint. And they celebrate all of her feast days. And Smoky Mary's is certainly not alone. In fact, not far from here, there's another St. Mary's that celebrates all of Mary's feast days. Mary is an important person in the life of the Jesus story. So her story is a story that does need to be told. And when we tell the story of Mary, there's a word that we hear a lot. In today's story, it actually appears 3 times. But that's not the only place we hear the word. It pops up time and time again when we talk about Mary. And it's even in Mary's official title on our liturgical calendar. In fact, many people identify Mary by this descriptor. And the word I'm talking about is virgin. In the story of Mary, a whole lot of emphasis is focused on the detail of her virginity. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask ourselves, what's going on here? Why is this so important? Now, when I was a kid, I was raised in a different denomination. And that denomination had very specific teachings about Mary's perpetual virginity. This denomination made sure you knew that Mary was a virgin when she conceived, and she stayed a virgin afterward. And it also taught that Mary never died, but instead was assumed into heaven. And this means that unlike us, who will only enter heaven in the form of our souls when we die, while our bodies stay here, Mary's soul and body stayed intact as she entered heaven. Now, in the Episcopal Church, we have no specific teachings on the matter, but there are plenty of Episcopalians who do share that belief. And there are also plenty who do not. And either is perfectly fine. And if you ask me my thoughts on the matter, I will simply tell you that I don't know. I don't know if Mary was a virgin for her entire life. I don't know if she was conceived without original sin. I don't know if she was assumed into heaven. But if you ask me those questions, I think it's fair of me to ask a follow-up question in return. Why does it matter so much? Really, why does it matter if Mary was or was not a virgin for her whole life? Now, I certainly think it adds to the miracle of the incarnation if we say that she conceived Jesus as a virgin. If Jesus had been conceived the same way as the rest of us, well, that takes a whole lot of the miracle away from his birth. And in that case, he was just a guy. A guy who did a lot of good things, but a guy nonetheless. Being born of a virgin means that he was both human and divine. And that's why we're Christians. And even our Muslim cousins share our belief that Jesus, whom they call Isa, was born of a virgin. But the scriptures say Jesus had brothers. And if he had brothers, then certainly his mother did not stay a virgin during her entire lifetime. And why should she have? She was married after all. And those same denominations that promote the perpetual virginity of Mary, by the way, also suggest that this translation is wrong and that the word that we translate as brother also means cousin. For what it's worth. But I digress. The real question I want us to focus on is, why do we as a society allow trivial things to matter so much? Why do we as a species put so much weight and emphasis on things that don't really warrant the need? Now, remember 20 years ago when the Da Vinci Code was released? And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but yes, it was 20 years ago. But anyway, remember the outcry of people musing over the possibility that Jesus may have been married? Christians collectively lost their minds. Jesus couldn't have been married. Blasphemy! But if we ground ourselves in our theology, I think we can and maybe even need to ask ourselves the question, why? If Jesus was married, does it make his teachings any less relevant? If Jesus was married, does it mean that his miracles were any less real? If Jesus was married, does it mean that he isn't the Son of God? And I have to say, if we're honest, the answer is no. Same thing goes for Mary and her virginity. If she lived a normal, healthy life after her first child was born, does that make her any less of a motherly figure? If she had human experiences that the rest of us also have, does that take away from the impact she has on our lives? And I think the answer still must be no. In fact, maybe if we know that Jesus and Mary lived normal human lives and did normal human things, we might even be able to relate to them even more strongly. Now, I know I'm springing these ponderings on you, but that's only because I trust you. You see, it takes a certain level of maturity in our theology to be able to break it down like this and to be okay with things not being tidy and neat and wrapped up with a bow. Because bows are for Christmas. And we've already mentioned we're not there yet. I think you, as a parish, possess the kind of spiritual maturity where you are okay pondering such things. So I want to encourage you to do just that. It's Advent. It's not Christmas. And Advent is a time to challenge our assumptions. Is it meaningful for you to believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary? And if so, that's great. I just want to make sure that you've discerned why. Is it meaningful for you to believe that Jesus was never married? And if so, then that's great. Just make sure you're honest with yourself about why it's important to you. Because challenging our assumptions like these can be jarring. But when we do the difficult work of analyzing our theology, that's how we grow in our faith. And that's what it's all about. That's what we as Christians are supposed to do. We're not supposed to sit back and just accept things because somebody in a pointy hat tells us to. We're supposed to study and investigate and use the tools God has given us in order to get to know him better, to get to know ourselves better, to deepen our understanding of his love and his grace. If he can make a priest out of a guy like me, just think of what he can do for you. It's Advent, not Christmas, not yet. That comes later. And I want to ask you to spend the little time left we have in Advent to be critical of your faith. Not so your faith is weakened, but so your faith is strengthened. Doing theology the right way isn't always tidy. And in fact, many times it's messy. St. Nicholas, that jolly guy who's already making his annual visit around the world as we speak, well, he's notable for having slapped someone in the face for disagreeing with him about Trinitarian theology. That's pretty messy. So dwell in the messiness and dwell in the chaos. Christmas is coming soon, in a few hours to be exact. So let's enter Christmas with a renewed faith and a deeper understanding of who we are and how best we can follow Jesus. The Jesus who will be born to us soon and very soon. Amen.